This is Ray Martinez. Thank you for joining me on the podcast today. This makes our 10th week, actually, of studying the fruit of the Spirit. This is the 9th topic of the fruit of the Spirit, and it's called self-control. So Paul is really concerned about our self-control. And what do we mean by self-control? But the Bible really emphasizes the importance of self-control, and it provides a number of verses to support this. Our key verse is Proverbs 25, verse 28, and it says, "Like a city whose walls are broken through is a person who lacks self-control." Now this is taken right out of Galatians 5:22 through 23 as we've been studying the fruit of the Spirit. But then we take a look at 1 Corinthians 9:25. And it says, "Everyone who competes in the game goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last. But we do it to get a crown that will last forever." So this self-control, as we try to prepare ourselves for the race, as any athlete would do, but this time this has a permanent goal. There's two notable characters in the Bible who really demonstrated self-control. Joseph. In the book of Genesis, Joseph demonstrated self-control when he resisted the advances of Potiphar's wife. Despite being tempted, he chose to honor God and maintain his integrity even in the face of temptation and potential consequences. Daniel, in the book of Daniel demonstrates self-control by refusing to eat the king's food and drink wine, choosing instead to eat only vegetables and drink water. This decision really showcases his discipline and commitment to remaining faithful to God's laws. Self-control plays a crucial role in helping individuals live a life that honors God and others in several ways. One is resisting temptation. Self-control enables us to resist temptation that goes against God's commandments. It helps us to overcome the desires of the flesh, such as greed, lust, anger, and envy, which can lead to harmful actions and broken relationships. By exercising self-control, we can make choices that align with God's will and avoid behaviors that harm us or others. Secondly, making wise decisions. Thinking before acting. It really helps us consider the consequences of our actions and choose behaviors that are in line with God's principles of love, justice, and righteousness. Exercising self-control can avoid impulsive, harmful choices instead of making choices that promote peace, harmony, and the well-being of others. This impulsiveness that we have, everybody's got it. There's an impulse to do something. I don't care if it's just grabbing a bag of chips and ripping it open and devouring it. We have these impulses. And this is what self-control is all about. Some examples of the people in the Bible that made wise decisions, and you know many of these people. King Solomon, he wrote the book of wisdom. And then there's King David, and Deborah, who was a prophetess and judge in Israel. And Daniel, you know how wise he was. And Moses, he was chosen by God to lead the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. Now, you know he had to have self-control with his people and with the king and the intimidation that was going on. He had to have self-control. And then you think about someone like Abigail in 1 Samuel 25. Abigail displayed wisdom and diplomacy in diffusing a potentially deadly situation involving her husband Nabal and David, who was on the run from King Saul. Her quick thinking and humility prevented the bloodshed, and it earned her David's respect. Ezra, a scribe and a priest. Ezra is known for his wisdom in leading Israelites exiles back to Jerusalem from Babylon, and for his efforts to reestablish the observance of the law of Moses among the people. You can read that in Ezra chapter 7 through chapter 10. Then think of Esther. Queen Esther really showed wisdom and courage in approaching the king to intercede on behalf of her people. The Jews who were facing genocide was horrendous, and her strategic timing and careful planning really ultimately led to the salvation of her people. You can read that in Esther chapter 4 through chapter 9. These biblical figures exemplify wisdom in various contexts, whether it's in leadership, diplomacy, courage, or adherence to divine principles. But it all required this thing called self-control. Here's the third point: practicing patience and forgiveness. They kind of go hand in glove. Self-control enables individuals to exercise patience and forgiveness towards others. It helps them control their emotions and reactions. This is important, even in challenging situations. We can respond with kindness, understanding, and forgiveness, fostering healthy relationships and promoting reconciliation. But there has to be this control of your emotions and your reactions. Nehemiah is a classic example of someone who did not have very much tolerance. He was a very strong businessman, and he had to get things done. In the book of Nehemiah, he rebukes the officials and nobles of Judah for oppressing the poor and loan sharking from them. He called for them to restore the fields, the vineyards, the olive groves, and houses that they had taken away from the people. Nehemiah then gathered a great assembly of people to address this whole matter, and he talked reason with them. He's doing good, right? And now, one man named Shemaiah proposed that they hide in the temple because their enemies were planning to attack them. However, Nehemiah discerns that this suggestion is a play to get him to act in fear and violate the sanctity of the temple, so he refuses. For the moment, it seems like Nehemiah is using good reasoning while dealing with people, but Nehemiah kind of loses it. Later in Nehemiah chapter 13, verse 25, he recounts how he contended with a certain men who had been married to foreign women, and he cursed them. He beat some of them, and he pulled out their hair. That doesn't sound like self-control, does it? But he was a no-nonsense guy, and he didn't put up with that, especially when it came to being obedient to God, because he had a job to complete, and he needed God's protection and guidance without everyone else falling into sin and doing the wrong thing. Here's the fourth point, is developing the fruit of the Spirit. When cultivating self-control, it allows other fruits such as love, joy, peace, kindness, and gentleness to flourish, so they all complement each other. Self-control can help us overcome various desires of the flesh that includes greed. So this self-control from greed really enables us to prioritize contentment and generosity and the well-being of others over the insatiable desires for more. Then this thing about lust. Self-control helps individuals control their sexual desires and impulses, avoiding immoral or harmful behaviors. And then there's anger. You know what I say about that. It's only one letter short of danger. Self-control allows us to manage our anger and respond to conflicts or provocations in a calm and constructive manner. It helps us avoid rage, violence, or harmful words, promoting peace, reconciliation, and understanding. You're not going to understand something if you don't get a hold of yourself and listen. Listen to what the real root problem is before jumping to conclusions. There's that knee-jerk reaction. We all know Peter used to have that in the Bible, and there's plenty of stories that indicate that, but what a guy. I mean, he turned his life around so much. But during a time of political turmoil in Israel, Amasa was the cousin of Joab, the commander of King David's army. Absalom, one of David's sons, had rebelled against him and gathered a significant following. David sent his forces, including Joab and Amasa, to confront Absalom's rebellion. After Absalom's forces were defeated, Amasa was appointed as the commander of David's army in place of Joab. However, later on, when David planned to pursue another rebellion, Joab, who was loyal to David, saw Amasa as a potential threat, and he took matters into his own hands. You read in 2 Samuel chapter 20, verses 9 through 10, it is recorded that Joab approached Amasa, his own cousin, remember these guys are cousins, on the pretense of greeting him. But when he took a hold of his beard with his right hand, as if to kiss him, in one swift motion, Joab pulled Amasa's beard with his right hand and struck him with the sword in his abdomen, killing him. This act of violence by Joab against Amasa was a display of his ruthless and cunning nature. No self-control there, was there? But he was siding with King David, and he didn't like people turning as a secret enemy against King David. It really further solidifies that Joab's position as the commander of David's army, as he removed a potential rival. However, it also highlights the volatility and the political intrigue that characterizes the time period. Envy is another one. Then there's this desire to be jealous or envious of others' possessions, their achievements, or circumstances. When we get jealous of somebody, that's really this envy that's kicking in. And that we lose self-control when we start envying other people or we become jealous of what they have. Instead, what we should do is to let us cultivate gratitude and contentment and celebration of others' blessings rather than harboring resentment or bitterness. Reverse it, turn it around. Envy is a reoccurring theme of the Bible, and here are a couple of examples. Cain. In Genesis chapter 4, verses 3 through 8, Cain becomes envious of his brother Abel when God accepts Abel's offering, but not his own. This envy ultimately leads Cain to commit the first murder by killing Abel out of jealousy. And when God confronts him, what does he do? Hey, am I my brother's keeper? God was very disappointed in him. Then there was King Saul. In 1 Samuel 18, verses 6 through 9, King Saul becomes envious of David after David's victory over Goliath and the subsequent adoration he receives from the people. Saul's envy grows as David's popularity and success increases, consequently leading him to make multiple attempts on David's life. The Pharisees and the religious leaders, in multiple instances throughout the Gospels, such as Matthew 27:18 and Mark 15, verse 10, the Pharisees and religious leaders become envious of Jesus due to his teachings, the miracles, and the popularity among the people. Their envy ultimately leads them to plot against Jesus and seek his crucifixion. These examples really illustrate the destructive nature of envy and its consequences in both personal and societal context. This is what happens when there's no self-control. And then there's the thing about gluttony. And I worry about this, not only with Americans. Americans are pretty heavy people compared to the rest of the world. But this bad eating habits that we have, including myself sometimes, it can help us resist excessive or unhealthy consumption of food or substances if we exercise self-control. If I go to a grocery store and I'm hungry, man, it's nothing for me to grab a bag of chips and tear through it. I have to exercise self-control. So it's on me, not on anyone else. I'm responsible for that. If you take a look at 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 18, it talks about Eli, the high priest, who is so obese, and as part of his punishment, God allowed him to fall off backwards on his chair and die. I think he actually broke his neck, but he was a very heavy man. Well, it helps us to maintain balance and discipline and stewardship of our bodies, promoting good health and self-care through self-control. Then there's this issue, I call it my sixth issue. It's called pride. Self-control helps individuals overcome the desire for self-exaltation, this arrogance or the superiority. It enables them to cultivate humility, recognizing their own strengths and weaknesses, and valuing others' contribution and worth. Look for the good in others. That can help control this out of control behavior. King Herod Agrippa in Acts chapter 12, verse 21 through 23. He's an interesting guy. King Herod Agrippa arrogantly accepts praise as a god during a public address, failing to give God the glory. As a result, he is struck down by an angel and dies right there in front of everybody. By exercising self-control, individuals can overcome these desires of the flesh and make choices that they align with God's principles of love, righteousness, and selflessness. It empowers them to live a life that honors God and promotes the well-being of others. We create an environment that reflects God's character and fosters positive relationships with others. We certainly can learn from what Lao Tzu once said. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. I like what Albert Einstein said. In the end, the only power that matters is self-control. You have a blessed day.